The morning sun spilled gold over the vineyards, painting everything in the kind of perfection postcards try to capture. I stood by the kitchen window, a cup of coffee warming my hands, and I watched the leaves tremble in a light breeze. On the surface, the estate hummed with calm and order, a testament to my parents' careful stewardship. Inside, I felt the familiar distance, a quiet gap between me and the people who had shaped my life. My mother moved through the kitchen with practiced grace, exchanging polite words with the staff, but there was a tightness in her voice that made me pause. I sipped my coffee slowly, forcing a smile I didn't feel, wondering if anyone else noticed, or if they were all as blind as they seemed. Something about the day already felt off, like the air had shifted subtly while I wasn't looking. My eyes drifted over the vineyard beyond the terrace, the rows of vines immaculate, my family's wealth displayed in every neat detail. Yet, beneath it all, an undercurrent of tension pulled at my chest, a silent question lingering in the space between smiles. The house buzzed with quiet preparation for the day ahead, a family gathering promised as a surprise announcement. My brother had returned from months out of state. His arrival met with laughter, embraces, and exaggerated admiration. I moved among the rooms, adjusting glasses on tables, arranging flowers just so, but no one paused to meet my eyes or acknowledge my effort. I remembered my childhood like a series of rehearsed performances, always assisting, always accommodating, rarely seen. A family friend lingered near the kitchen doorway, offering a look of quiet sympathy, a glance that spoke volumes more than any words ever could. I felt a familiar sting, a mixture of resentment and resignation, rehearsing my reactions yet again. I had anticipated this, but anticipation didn't make it easier. Each smile around the room felt layered, and I knew I'd have to navigate their attention with careful precision. When my father stepped forward to address everyone, the room quieted as if on cue. He announced that my brother would inherit the family vineyard, a $95 million investment, and a sleek new Tesla to accompany the fortune. Applause filled the room, a warm wave that slapped against me, unwelcomed. I clapped, barely, my hands stiff, my throat tight. Inside, a storm of disbelief and silent fury churned. I remembered countless moments from my teen years, opportunities I had quietly relinquished for the sake of family harmony, promises I had honored alone. And now, this, the confirmation of what I had suspected all along, but hoped to deny, the will had been altered, and I had been left with shadows of my share. My stomach nodded, and I pressed my lips together, breathing slowly to maintain a calm mask. The contrast was stark, celebration outside, devastation inside. Just as I prepared to slip away from the crowd, a familiar voice stopped me. A friend of the family, someone who knew more than they ought to, pressed a small envelope into my hand. "I thought you should have this. I wasn't supposed to see it," he said quietly, eyes avoiding mine. My fingers trembled as I tore the seal. Inside was a copy of an earlier version of the will, a version where I had been designated half of the estate. Betrayal and disbelief collided, a dizzying force that made the world tilt. I whispered to myself the family motto, a saying drilled into me since childhood: family first. But the words tasted bitter on my tongue. I walked away from the celebration unnoticed, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. The wind tugged at my hair, carrying with it the scent of ripening grapes and salt from the distant coast. My mind replayed every slight, every time I had smiled and said, "It's okay," as though my compliance could disguise the imbalance. Maybe it had never been okay. Maybe my silence had been mistaken for consent. Standing at the edge of the vineyard, the horizon stretching endlessly, I made a vow. I didn't know what this meant yet, but I wouldn't be silent anymore. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, letting the quiet of my apartment wash over the chaos that had followed me from the family gathering. The hurt still sat heavy in my chest, that familiar sting of disbelief and simmering resentment gnawed at me. I sank into the worn armchair by the window, thinking about all the years I'd been loyal, the countless times I had put family first, only to be sidelined today in front of everyone. The contrast was sharp, almost cruel, and I couldn't help but replay every subtle slight, every laugh shared at my expense. Still, I told myself to breathe, to think clearly. There was no use in spiraling into bitterness. I repeated my mantra quietly under my breath. Life isn't fair, but you can be smart about it. That thought alone steadied me, gave me a sense of purpose. I would act, not linger in sorrow. The phone rang, cutting through the lingering tension. Seeing my friend's name, the one who had slipped me the envelope earlier, I felt a spark of hope. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe by the coast, far enough from prying eyes. Over steaming cups of coffee, we sifted through memories and family stories, peeling back layers that had always seemed unremarkable. My friend spoke cautiously, hinting at irregularities in the will. "You have to move carefully. This isn't just money. It's about power," she warned. I listened, nodding, my mind already spinning through ways to verify these suspicions without drawing attention. Hurt shifted into curiosity, then something closer to empowerment. I realized I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was planning, observing, calculating. Later, in the solitude of my apartment, I finally opened the envelope with care. Inside was a copy of an older draft of my father's will. At first glance, the differences were subtle, but as I studied the handwritten notes from his attorney, a sense of alarm crept over me. My brother had received far more than I had been promised in the original version. I ran scenarios through my head, weighing the moral implications against the justice I felt I deserved. Then I found it, a hidden page, folded and tucked, suggesting deliberate alteration. Someone had tampered with the will, and the realization hit me with a cold, calculating clarity. This wasn't just oversight. It was intentional, and it meant I now had leverage I hadn't anticipated. I knew I had to be strategic. Pulling out my journal, I began mapping a step-by-step plan. Verify the document's authenticity, gather witnesses discreetly, understand the family's patterns, and anticipate resistance from both my brother and my parents. I reached out to trusted allies, my lawyer, a reliable accountant, and my friend, carefully, ensuring that every move remained quiet. Publicly, I maintained composure, smiling and nodding like nothing had changed, even as my mind raced through possible outcomes. Fear mingled with determination, a subtle hum beneath my steady exterior. I felt the beginnings of a power shift, the first stirrings of control over a situation that had long seemed predetermined by others. As I walked home later, the sun dipping low over the vineyards, a shadow caught my eye. Someone was following me, moving deliberately yet cautiously along the edge of the path. My pulse quickened, a sharp awareness settling over me. This had become bigger than family squabbles or a contested will. Stakes had risen to a level I hadn't anticipated. I pressed myself against the trunk of a nearby tree, heart racing, ears straining for the slightest sound. Thoughts ran rapidly through my mind. Who knew what I had discovered? How far were they willing to go? The air was thick with tension, the world narrowing to the immediate danger. And in that quiet, perilous moment, I realized I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront the first person who could explain everything. I went over the notes from the envelope again, pacing the small living room like a soldier running drills before a battle. Every word from my friend's warning replayed in my head, each syllable a reminder that I had to keep my head clear. I rehearsed questions silently, the kind that might slip under the radar, but could unravel the threads my family had so carefully knotted over decades. Standing in front of the mirror, I adjusted my blazer, smoothing the sleeves until they fell just right. My reflection looked back at me, calm and composed, though beneath the surface my stomach twisted with anticipation. Knowledge is power. Preparation is everything, I whispered to myself, the words a mantra that grounded me. Memories of handling tense conversations at work flashed through my mind, confronting a dishonest partner, negotiating tricky contracts. I had survived those moments without losing my balance. Tonight, I reminded myself, would be no different. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and left the apartment, mentally locking my nervousness behind a door I wouldn't open again until it was absolutely necessary. By the time I arrived at the office building, the sun had dipped low, casting elongated shadows across the quiet street. The place looked ordinary, unremarkable even. But I had learned to read the subtleties that ordinary eyes missed. The receptionist's eyes flickered with a tension she tried to hide, a slight tightening of her jaw that spoke louder than any words. I noted every detail: the position of chairs, the muted hum of a copier in the corner, the faint smell of cleaning products. Strategically, I assessed exits, potential hiding spots, and any irregularities in the flow of people coming and going. My mind ran through scenarios like a chess game, anticipating every move, every misstep. A wry smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. "At least it's not another family party," I muttered under my breath, letting a spark of humor steady my nerves. Curiosity hummed through me, mingling with the thrill of anticipation. Every instinct was alert, every sense sharpened. When the door finally opened, I didn't expect to see him. Someone I hadn't counted on, an insider I barely recognized yet instinctively trusted. He nodded briefly, almost apologetically, and motioned for me to sit. Within minutes, he was revealing details that cut straight to the heart of my family's hidden dynamics. Decisions skewed by favoritism, veiled threats, and calculated manipulations that had shaped my life without my knowledge. He outlined the powerful forces at play, explaining who aligned with whom, and offered advice on gathering proof without alerting anyone. I asked questions that tested the limits of his knowledge, probing for patterns and inconsistencies. By the end of our conversation, a new understanding dawned. Not everyone in my family was united with my brother. Some, quietly and secretly, were on my side. He laid out stacks of documents, old letters, and emails, and as I sifted through them, the picture became clearer. Every decision, every move, every subtle slight now seemed part of a long game designed to favor certain members over others. I traced events on a mental timeline, noting how greed, influence, and pressure had steered outcomes. A pang of betrayal surfaced, but I swallowed it and let it fuel strategy instead of despair. One email, in particular, caught my eye. A name I had never heard before. A sibling, hidden from the family narrative, was quietly influencing events from behind the curtain. The revelation shook me, but I absorbed it with measured calm. I was no longer merely reacting. I was collecting the tools to confront, to protect, to take control. By the time we concluded, I had a plan forming in my mind: who to approach first, the angles to exploit, the legal levers to pull if necessary. I made mental notes for meetings with trusted allies, contingency plans for surprises, and mapped out how to maintain my composure no matter what unfolded. The insider left me with a final, ominous hint. Tonight's family dinner would reveal more than anyone expected. I felt a surge of empowerment, my fear replaced by determination, my nerves replaced by focus. I could see the path ahead, dim and uncertain, but mine to navigate. Every calculated step would bring me closer to understanding, to justice, and maybe, finally, to reclaiming the narrative of my own life. I arrived at the family mansion just as the sun dipped behind the Santa Barbara hills, the sky tinged with shades of gold and pink. The driveway stretched out before me, lined with manicured hedges and the faint scent of gardenias carried on the evening breeze. I could feel the tension under the grandeur, like the polished floors and crystal chandeliers were just a stage, hiding more than they revealed. As I stepped inside, the faint clink of silverware and muffled laughter drifted from the dining room, and I took a moment to steady myself, reminding my mind to stay sharp, composed, and strategic. Faces turned as I entered, some welcoming with warmth, others registering polite acknowledgement with that subtle edge of suspicion I'd learned to spot. My brother gave me a quick, almost imperceptible smirk, and I noted it silently, storing it away with the small clues I'd gathered earlier that day. I moved to my seat with deliberate calm, keeping my posture straight, my eyes alert, mentally rehearsing the questions and observations I intended to weave into the evening. Inside, a quiet tension thrummed through me, anticipation and caution threading together as the family dinner began. The conversation started with the usual pleasantries, how the gardens were flourishing, a recent charity gala, the weather, but my attention remained on the glances exchanged across the table. My cousin's raised eyebrow, the almost imperceptible tightening of my brother's jaw, the way Aunt Margaret's fingers tapped rhythmically against her glass. I smiled and offered a light joke about Dad's old fishing stories, and it worked, at least on the surface, to ease the tension. Yet beneath it, I noted inconsistencies, subtle manipulations, the careful crafting of narratives meant to distract or mislead. Every story, every laugh, every nod was analyzed, categorized. Who could be trusted? Who was angling for advantage? I played along with the charm, the politeness, even as my mind mapped alliances, rivalries, and potential vulnerabilities. Each observation felt empowering, as if I were quietly turning the table into my own chessboard, while outwardly appearing just another daughter at a family dinner, sipping wine with a calm, neutral smile. The evening took a sharp turn when my brother, seemingly in mid-laughter, let slip a cutting remark about my career choices, more pointed than I expected. The words hung heavy in the air, and I felt the room stiffen. Cousins shifted in their chairs, some eyes flicking toward me, others avoiding the confrontation entirely. My heartbeat quickened, but I didn't react outwardly. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make the tension palpable before responding with controlled precision, a careful blend of humor and pointed observation that redirected the sting of his words back toward the absurdity of the remark itself. The room exhaled collectively, but the dynamics had shifted. Old grudges surfaced in subtle ways, half smiles, narrowed eyes, the smallest quivers in voices that had never wavered before. I stored these reactions away like currency, each one a resource for future maneuvers, a map of the alliances and fissures hidden beneath the veneer of polite conversation. Then came the confession that no one saw coming. Aunt Margaret, who had been quietly observing everyone with her usual composed demeanor, leaned forward, her voice softer than the crystal-clear silence of the room. She shared a personal secret, one connected to my past in ways that left me momentarily unsteady. Shock flared inside me, but I maintained my poise, letting her speak while I assessed the implications, the subtle shifts in her tone and posture, the unspoken plea for understanding or discretion. This revelation opened new avenues of influence, opportunities to steer family decisions with tact, to protect myself without appearing manipulative. I guided the conversation with careful attentiveness, asking questions just sharp enough to clarify without prying, demonstrating both intelligence and emotional control. As I listened, I felt a surge of empowerment. Knowledge was power, and tonight, the knowledge I gained would be a tool I could wield strategically. The dinner drew to a close with polite farewells, the clinking of silver and the soft shuffle of chairs marking the end of the gathering. Yet the tension lingered like a shadow, impossible to ignore. As I rose to leave, my eyes caught a small, unmarked envelope near my plate, clearly left with intention. Whoever placed it knew I would notice, and that silent message was enough to set my mind racing with possibilities. I reflected on the evening. Who had aligned with me, who had positioned against me, what secrets had emerged, and how they could reshape the delicate balance of this family. Calm on the outside, my mind was already calculating the next steps, anticipating the shifts that were sure to come. There was an unmistakable sense that the story was far from over, that the revelations of tonight would ripple through the family in ways I had only begun to comprehend. The next piece, I knew instinctively, would change everything. The house had settled into an uneasy quiet by the time I stepped into my room, the echoes of dinner still lingering in my mind. My shoulders ached and my feet throbbed, but my thoughts raced faster than my body could keep up. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, letting the weight of the evening settle in. Faces, words, gestures, they all replayed in a loop I couldn't turn off. There was something in the way my uncle's hand lingered on the wine glass, the way my sister laughed just a fraction too long at Dad's stories. Patterns began to emerge like a map I hadn't been given, subtle signals of loyalty, tension, and deception. I pulled my journal from the drawer and scribbled quick notes, coded phrases only I could decipher, marking who smiled too widely, who avoided my gaze, who spoke with carefully measured pauses. I didn't trust any of it yet, but I needed to see the threads before making a move. As I wrote, a sense of calm determination replaced the fatigue. I wasn't just surviving these dinners. I was mapping them, learning them, preparing. Every glance around that dining table had meaning, and I intended to understand all of it. Then I saw it. An envelope tucked neatly under the edge of my desk, unmarked and out of place. My heart gave a quiet jolt, though my face betrayed nothing. I picked it up carefully, weighing it in my hands. No return address, no hint of origin. Inside, a folded piece of paper, cryptic and concise, with words that made me pause. A family secret hinted at. Fragments of conversations I had long dismissed as inconsequential now suddenly pointed in a new direction. My pulse quickened. Not out of fear, but from the thrill of discovery. Could this explain the inconsistencies, the little slips I'd noticed over the years? I had to consider the sender, the intent behind revealing it, the risk of trusting information that could be a trap. Yet even in my caution, I felt a spark of empowerment. I was holding knowledge that could change everything, a tool I had never had before. Carefully, I set it aside, letting the weight of its implications sink in. Hours passed as I deciphered the note, each line peeling back another layer of hidden motives, and then it hit me. The truth about my cousin, a revelation that reframed every conversation, every expression from dinner. He had been maneuvering for control for years, his smiles masking calculation, his charm a veneer over manipulation. The connections to past disagreements, the subtle dismissals, the feigned concern, all of it aligned perfectly now. Anger rose, sharp but contained, replaced immediately by strategic clarity. I needed leverage, not confrontation yet. I considered my next steps, how to safeguard myself while observing his moves. Knowledge gave me a calm edge. I wasn't reacting blindly. I was anticipating, plotting, planning with patience. Each thought was measured, deliberate. Shock had been brief. What remained was quiet, confident empowerment. I could turn this. I would. The sound of footsteps outside my study made me tense, heart skipping. A familiar voice called softly, hesitant, yet familiar. It was my aunt, someone I hadn't expected to ally with, standing in the doorway with an uneasy smile. She slipped inside, glancing around, then lowered her voice. She had information of her own, a resource hidden from the rest of the family, a secret that could shift the dynamics completely. I studied her, weighing the sincerity, testing her intent. As we talked, it became clear that she wasn't just seeking to confide. She wanted to act strategically, just as I did. Relief mingled with cautious trust. I wasn't alone in this labyrinth of manipulation. Together, carefully, we began to chart a path, each revelation confirming the stakes and potential gains. I realized then that alliances were fluid, but valuable if chosen wisely, and that sometimes unexpected allies emerged in the places you least anticipated. A spark of excitement mingled with vigilance. The game had changed, and we had new pieces to play. I began sketching out plans, cautious and precise, for confronting hidden agendas or using them to my advantage. Every note I left for my aunt was subtle, coded, nothing that would alert prying eyes or ears. I thought back to the dinner, to every half-smile and whispered comment, and realized that the revelations in the envelope had reshaped my understanding. The house, the family, even the history I thought I knew, was now a web of intentions I could navigate. I mapped scenarios, potential conversations, reactions, and the safe openings for action. The excitement of possibility coursed through me, tempered by patience. As I reviewed my notes, a movement in the corner of the room made me stiffen, a shadowed figure, just beyond the reach of the lamp's glow, watching, not yet seen, but certainly present, a reminder that while I had knowledge, I was not without danger. Every choice, every step forward would need to be calculated. And I was ready. I went over the envelope again, letting each note, each scrap of insight sink in. The pieces of the puzzle had been scattered across conversations, casual remarks, and that one overheard phone call I'd almost dismissed. I traced my finger along the edges of the desk, counting the risk in my head, weighing the possible outcomes if I confronted him tonight. My phone lay beside me, messages from my ally unread but ready, like a lifeline I could throw when needed. I adjusted the papers in front of me, checked that I had the proof that couldn't be dismissed. Calmness was a mask I had learned to wear, but underneath, my pulse hummed insistently, a quiet warning. From the corner of the hallway, I could see the shadow that belonged to someone who had promised support, and perhaps, like me, was waiting to see what would happen next. I took a breath, rehearsed my words, and reminded myself that tonight I needed more than courage. I needed precision, control, and the kind of patience that could turn the tide before anyone knew I'd struck. The sudden click of the hallway door drew me out of my thoughts. My sister stepped in, eyes bright but calculating, her posture casual enough to seem innocent, yet her presence alone shifted the air. "Late night," she said, voice light, almost teasing, but I heard the layers underneath. There was a question in her tone, a subtle test. What did I know, and what was I willing to reveal? I let my gaze linger on her hands, the slight tension in her shoulders. Every gesture, every hesitant smile carried information. I noticed the tiny twitch near her left eye, the telltale sign of someone holding back something. She moved closer, pretending to examine a painting, but every step whispered intent. I responded with measured politeness, not giving away my awareness, yet absorbing every signal. My mind raced through the implications while my body stayed poised. I could sense the manipulation attempt, the lure, but also my growing sense of control. I wasn't just observing, I was preparing to act. I spoke first, a gentle but firm voice, choosing my words carefully. "I found some things that don't quite add up," I said, letting my calm tone carry authority. "Little pieces that suggest more than what meets the eye." Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, before settling back into an expression of neutrality. I continued, revealing small, indirect evidence without letting her know how much I truly held. It's interesting how some actions don't match the words people use. I watched every twitch, every micro-expression. The air thickened with the unsaid. I could feel the history of tensions surfacing, the silent arguments that had never been spoken aloud. My mind traced the past, the patterns, the small betrayals long buried, and yet I maintained my calm, letting the weight of my observation press on her. I wasn't just confronting, I was asserting intelligence, quietly but unmistakably. Every word, every glance, was a move in a game she hadn't realized I was playing. Then it happened. A slip, subtle but undeniable. The way she paused, the fraction of hesitation before she responded. The truth in her eyes. Betrayal. Someone I had trusted, someone who had promised loyalty, had been maneuvering behind my back. My stomach twisted, a brief flare of shock, but I swallowed it immediately. Panic wasn't an option. I asked questions calmly, deliberately slow, extracting the facts without giving away my inner storm. Every answer was a stepping stone, every confession a lever I could use. I didn't lash out, didn't tremble. Instead, I cataloged, I strategized, and I allowed a quiet, simmering anger to sharpen my focus. This revelation didn't weaken me. It handed me a tool to reshape the dynamics at play. Trust had been fractured, yes, but clarity had been gained. I realized then just how much strength I had underestimated in myself. I could act swiftly, decisively, and without visible tremor. I reorganized the narrative in my mind, stepping into a position of subtle power. Every phrase I delivered was intentional, every pause designed to assert control. Allies, hidden but attentive, recognized the shift, their quiet nods confirming that the tide was turning. I left no openings, no vulnerability, only a poised readiness for the next step. Confidence grew quietly, internally, and I could feel it radiating outward, reshaping the room, the balance, the very hierarchy of influence. I had become not just a participant, but a strategist, capable of reclaiming the initiative that had momentarily slipped. And yet, as the tension ebbed, I sensed it, the shadow from the edge of the hall, a presence that had been watching all along. I thought I had regained command, that the room and its truths were mine to navigate. But the faint, almost imperceptible movement told me otherwise. There was an observer I hadn't accounted for, someone whose intentions were unknown and whose timing could shatter the fragile calm I'd established. My heartbeat slowed, a sharp awareness threading through me. The night had given me strength, but it had also reminded me that vigilance never ended. The shadows in the hall were never empty. And as I straightened my shoulders, preparing for what might come next, I understood. The game was far from over. After the confrontation in the library, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover, more that had been tucked away and forgotten, perhaps deliberately. I sat in the quiet of the sitting room, the evening light fading, and made up my mind. The attic had always been off limits, a place we never bothered to explore, a dusty repository of things best left unseen. Yet tonight, that very inaccessibility felt like a challenge. I gathered a flashlight, gloves, a notebook, my camera, and my phone. Each item was chosen carefully, each one a tool for uncovering truths I wasn't yet ready to confront. I rehearsed in my head the caution I'd need. Step lightly, watch for loose floorboards, stay alert for the unexpected. My heartbeat picked up, a mix of curiosity and apprehension, the thrill of discovery making my hands tingle slightly. This was more than just snooping. It felt like a necessary step, a way to confront the shadows of my own family's past. The air in the hallway felt heavier as I approached the narrow stairwell that led to the attic, the final barrier between me and answers I had long suspected were waiting. The attic door groaned as I pushed it open, releasing a stale breath of air that smelled of wood and long-forgotten dust. Moonlight slanted through the small windows, illuminating stacks of furniture draped in tattered sheets and cobwebs stretching across corners. My footsteps echoed on the creaking floorboards as I moved deeper inside, each sound amplified by the silence of years. The air was cold and smelled faintly of mildew, but I kept my focus sharp. Old trunks lined the walls, photographs yellowed with age, letters peeking out from forgotten envelopes, small heirlooms resting silently as if waiting for someone to remember them. I paused at a faded portrait, a woman staring back with eyes that felt both familiar and distant, a whisper of a memory I couldn't place. Every artifact seemed to hum with the past, stirring a mix of nostalgia and unease. My pulse slowed and quickened in turns, curiosity guiding my careful exploration. I documented what I could, careful not to disturb more than necessary, letting the silence of the attic amplify each small discovery. In the far corner, partially hidden under a threadbare blanket, I spotted a trunk with a rusted lock. Kneeling, I tested its weight, then fished around in my pockets for the small tools I'd brought. The lock gave way with a reluctant click, and inside I found stacks of letters, journals, and financial records, neatly arranged yet forgotten. I opened the journals, my eyes scanning the handwritten pages for familiar names, events, and dates. Hidden messages emerged, subtle annotations hinting at disputes that had been suppressed, alliances carefully concealed. Patterns began to form, motives I hadn't suspected behind past confrontations now becoming clear. I documented everything, careful to maintain order, analyzing each fragment with an almost clinical detachment. I paused often, thinking through how this information could be used, both ethically and strategically. The attic seemed to shrink around me, the weight of what I was uncovering pressing down, yet I felt a quiet surge of empowerment. Knowledge, after all, was leverage, and in that dimly lit space, I held the upper hand for the first time in a long while. As I sifted through a bundle of letters, a particular name leapt out, one that had never been mentioned in family stories. My heart skipped a beat. A previously unknown relative, a figure whose existence explained patterns of betrayal and secrecy I had always sensed but could never pinpoint. The implications were immediate and profound. Past mistakes, alliances, and betrayals were not just history, they were influencing the present, shaping the conflicts I had faced in recent weeks. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Shock gave way to strategic clarity. I would use this knowledge without letting emotion cloud judgment, weighing each action carefully. The discovery posed questions I couldn't ignore. How far had deception run? Who else might be involved? And how could I protect myself while leveraging what I now knew? Astonishment tinged with a cautious sense of empowerment settled over me, a mixture of dread and opportunity that made my pulse tighten. And then, I noticed subtle traces that suggested someone else had been here. Not recently, but not long ago either. My mind went to the ally I had relied on in previous days, the one whose loyalty had never seemed in question. A small trap, a carefully worded question, revealed cracks I had overlooked. Micro-expressions betrayed hesitation, a flicker of something unspoken. The truth crystallized. They had their own stake, their own hidden agenda. I assessed quickly, deciding when to confront, when to observe, and when to manipulate the emerging situation. The potential for collaboration was there, but so was the risk of betrayal. Each calculation sharpened my focus, my suspicion tempered by the thrill of insight. I felt a subtle triumph, recognizing a layer of strategy I hadn't anticipated, a game within a game unfolding right before me. I stepped back from the trunk, letting my discoveries settle in my mind. Mapping relationships, hidden loyalties, and possible threats, I updated my mental strategy, aligning the pieces like a chessboard I had only just begun to understand. Short-term moves needed to be cautious, but the long-term plan demanded foresight and patience. I felt a renewed sense of agency, an inner resolve to confront obstacles and protect the leverage I now held. The attic, dusty and quiet, became a space of clarity, each artifact, each letter, a piece of a puzzle finally taking shape. My thoughts ran ahead, anticipating moves and countermoves, the weight of responsibility balanced by the exhilaration of regained control. I was about to leave when a faint whisper stopped me mid-step. A rustle, almost imperceptible, echoed from the shadows, as if someone was observing, waiting. I froze, ears straining, pulse quickening again. The thought hit me. Perhaps my secret was already compromised. Perhaps someone else knew, or had followed me here. The whisper carried with it both threat and intrigue, a reminder that discovery was never without consequence. I gripped the flashlight tighter, ready for whatever came next, every sense heightened, every thought alert. The attic had yielded its secrets, but the story was far from over. I climbed down from the attic with my heart still pounding, the echoes of creaking floorboards following me like a quiet warning. The papers I'd found, the notes tucked into old journals, every detail about alliances and betrayals, it all pressed on my mind with a weight I couldn't shake. I paused in the hallway, hands lingering over the lock on the study door, double-checked the deadbolt, just in case someone had followed me, someone who wanted those secrets for themselves. My phone sat in my pocket, ready to contact the one person I trusted above all, just a single text away. The shadows in the corners of the living room seemed a little too dark, too watchful, but I refused to show hesitation. I had to move carefully, every step deliberate. The air smelled faintly of the fireplace from earlier, a comforting domestic smell that contrasted sharply with the gnawing suspicion crawling up my spine. The house felt alive in a way I couldn't yet name, every creak and whisper hinting at unseen eyes. I locked the door behind me and exhaled slowly, letting the adrenaline mix with cold determination. The doorbell rang, abrupt and formal, slicing through the quiet like a knife. I didn't recognize the chime. It wasn't one we ever used, but I didn't hesitate. When I opened the door, a figure stood there, impeccably dressed and wearing a mask that obscured more than just the nose and mouth. Their posture was perfect, their voice calm, almost rehearsed. "I believe I have information you'll want," they said, eyes glinting with a kind of precision that made my skin prickle. I studied them, taking in the faint tilt of the head, the subtle tension in their shoulders. Something about the way they carried themselves spoke of familiarity with this house, though I couldn't place it immediately. I noted the timing of their arrival, the style of their coat, the gloves. They were deliberate, calculated, and yet, something in their expression, the micro-flash of hesitation, hinted at an underlying agenda. I didn't step back, not even slightly, though my instincts screamed caution. We moved inside, the guests' steps measured and silent on the polished floor. I began asking questions, each carefully crafted to reveal inconsistencies. Where were they from? How did they know about my family? Every answer was examined for micro-gestures, tiny slips in tone. I pressed gently, steering the conversation like a chess game, never letting them realize they were being tested. I leaned against the mantel, folding my arms, letting the firelight catch the edges of the documents I'd secured earlier. My mind was alive with calculation, weighing each word, each glance. They hesitated, a flicker of impatience betraying the calm mask. I smiled softly, inwardly noting the small victories of control. My voice remained steady, measured, inviting without yielding. Then came the betrayal, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A phrase slipped, an alignment hinted towards someone I had fought against for years, the very adversary who had threatened the balance of my family's legacy. My pulse jumped, and for a fleeting moment, surprise shot through me, but I quickly masked it with composed scrutiny, my eyes narrowing as I recalibrated strategy. Every instinct screamed caution, every past lesson reminding me not to underestimate the danger. I realized in an instant the depth of deception, the potential cost of inaction. My hands flexed lightly at my sides, ready, as I considered my options, plotting the next move like a general mapping battle lines. The mask fell. Figuratively first, then literally. A slight shift in their stance, a glance I'd almost missed, revealed a truth that struck like ice water. They were someone I had overlooked entirely, a hidden sibling, or perhaps a previously unknown enemy, whose existence had been buried in shadows until now. The documents I'd found in the attic aligned with this revelation, painting a complete picture I hadn't fully anticipated. Shock surged, but it was tempered immediately by the clarity of intellect. Fear receded, replaced by the cold, sharp confidence that had always guided me through treachery. I adjusted my approach, reconsidering leverage points, predicting their reactions before they themselves knew their next move. I held the room with a quiet authority, letting the weight of my presence press subtly against them. Every word I spoke, every pause I allowed, was measured to assert dominance without overt confrontation. The air between us tightened, a silent duel of strategy and perception. They responded cautiously, aware now that I had seen through their masquerade. I let a small smile play at the corners of my lips, just enough to hint at unyielding control. Diplomacy and intimidation intertwined naturally, each sentence a careful test of will. My mind raced ahead, plotting contingencies while my expression remained calm and unshaken. As the guest moved toward the door, the briefest shadow of movement at the edge of my vision caught my attention. There, half hidden beneath the ornate console, was an envelope I hadn't noticed before. I bent slightly to retrieve it, the paper cold and heavy with purpose. Whoever had sent it knew I would see it now, knew exactly how to unsettle me without stepping foot inside. It was a reminder that the game was far from over, that betrayal was not confined to a single moment, a single visitor. I tucked it into my coat, feeling the familiar tension of anticipation coil through me. The house seemed quieter now, but the silence carried the weight of unspoken threats. I knew I had to be ready, alert to every shadow and whisper, for the danger had only deepened. The evening had already settled into a soft, uneasy darkness by the time I returned to the mansion. The memory of the masked guest's words lingered like a stubborn shadow. I sat in the study, the warm light of the desk lamp illuminating the scattered notes and photographs I had been poring over. Every detail from that encounter replayed in my mind, the subtle inflection in his voice, the careful avoidance of certain questions, the faint trace of a smirk that didn't belong. I tried to line up the pieces, cross-checking each statement against old letters, family records, and the fragments of overheard conversations. My mind raced through possibilities. Who could have orchestrated this deception, and for what purpose? Allies could be enemies. Enemies could be pretending allies. I felt the familiar twinge of suspicion sharpen into determination. I needed clarity, and I needed it tonight. Each deduction, each small realization, felt like holding a tiny, trembling flame against the shadows that threatened to engulf the truth. Later, I climbed the narrow attic stairs, the creak of the wooden steps reminding me that the house had its own stories to tell. There, beneath the dust and forgotten boxes, I returned to the documents I had hidden weeks ago. The fragile papers smelled faintly of mildew, but their content burned with secrets. As I carefully unfolded one, a previously unnoticed margin note caught my eye. Another file revealed contradictions I hadn't seen before. My pulse quickened. Patterns began to emerge, threads connecting the masked guest to family disputes and long-buried alliances. I could feel the excitement bubble inside me, tempered by the caution that had kept me alive through so many betrayals. Piece by piece, the mosaic of deception was revealing itself. And somewhere in those quiet moments of inspection, I realized the web was far more intricate than I had ever imagined. Then it happened. My elbow nudged a small stack of books against the far wall, and the floor beneath them shifted. A hidden latch revealed a narrow, dark passage. I paused, listening for any signs of traps or witnesses. Heart hammering, I inched forward, each step deliberate, the air thick with dust and the scent of something older, something secret. The passage led to a small compartment where additional documents and artifacts lay waiting. I traced the contours of an old family crest etched into a box, carefully lifting its lid. Inside were letters and ledgers, names and dates that illuminated alliances and betrayals I hadn't suspected. The thrill of discovery surged through me, mixed with a tension that tightened my chest. Every revelation seemed to pulse in time with my own heartbeat. I had stumbled into a hidden narrative, a side of my family's history that few had ever seen, and fewer could manipulate. Among the papers, I found the truth I hadn't wanted to confront. A trusted figure, someone I had believed in, had been maneuvering events for their own gain, their motives masked under the guise of loyalty. Past actions that had seemed minor, even inconsequential, now gleamed with the unmistakable hue of manipulation. I sat back, the weight of realization pressing down on me, but beneath it, a spark of empowerment ignited. I would not be caught off guard. The strategy to reclaim control began forming in my mind, carefully, deliberately, without alerting anyone to the full scope of what I now knew. Shock mingled with clarity. Indignation tempered with calculation. I understood the danger, but I also recognized the power this knowledge gave me. It was mine to wield, and I would wield it wisely. Preparations followed naturally. I went over questions I might ask, scenarios I might provoke, and contingencies in case the confrontation went sideways. Every possible response, every lie that might be told, had a countermeasure in my mental notebook. I felt the familiar steadiness return as I mapped the territory of my own safety. Confidence settled over me, a controlled anticipation coursing through my veins. I was ready, not just to confront, but to test loyalty, to reveal truth in a space where deception had long ruled. The night felt heavier with purpose. Each moment of quiet was a step toward action, measured and deliberate. When the confrontation came, it confirmed what I had suspected. The subtle shifts in expression, the careful avoidance of eye contact, the tone that wavered despite attempts at composure, all screamed betrayal. It was undeniable now. Someone I had considered an ally had been working against me all along. Yet even in anger, I maintained a strategic calm, observing, absorbing, calculating the next moves. My focus narrowed to a fine point: protect the evidence, protect myself, and retain the upper hand. Every word, every reaction was a piece of the puzzle I would use to reclaim control. Controlled rage, focused purpose, and the clarity of undeniable truth combined to give me a sense of dominance I had rarely felt before. Just as I began to feel the confrontation had run its course, a new element emerged. A note slipped into the open, a subtle warning of a looming threat I hadn't anticipated. My pulse quickened as the weight of this hidden danger settled on my shoulders. The storm wasn't over, it had only begun. Danger was escalating, and I knew the next steps would test every ounce of cunning, every fragment of knowledge I had amassed. I paused, letting the realization sink in, aware that the coming hours would demand vigilance beyond anything I had experienced. The night had drawn a line between past deception and the chaos yet to come, leaving me ready to face whatever it held.